Hello and welcome to the final entry in the Persona 5 Royal Review series, a marathon based around a single game that's told over the course of a single calendar year, yet took a year and a half to get to this point. Starting soon after P5R's PC release in October of 2022, it is now the middle of April 2023. What a wonder a mixture of stress, depression, work, money troubles, and good old laziness will do. Regardless, we are now finally at the brand new third semester story content, marking the first time since 2017 that I'll be experiencing a brand new story in Persona 5 that isn't in the form of a spin-off. What do I think of this final epic adventure for the Phantom Thieves until the next final epic adventure for the Phantom Thieves? Well, picking back up where we left off last time, Joker and company are throwing a New Year's party at LeBlanc. That night, however, Joker has a strange dream. He finds himself in the school counselor's office in his velvet room prison uniform. All he wants to do is leave. He walks out into the hall where he finds a butterfly. As he follows it, he can hear the voices of his friends expressing their desires and regrets. As he's about to leave the school, a voice tells him he's not supposed to leave, but relents when he continues on. Joker wakes up the next morning and texts Kasumi, promising to meet up with her later at the local shrine. While working behind the counter, Futaba comes in to show off her new yukata that her mom picked out for her, gleefully showing off to complete strangers before bolting. Before we leave for the shrine, however, a strange man talks to us casually, claiming that we know exactly who he is and that we should just cut it out. Alongside Kasumi, we also run into the rest of the Phantom Thieves at the shrine. They can't stay and hang out, however, as they all have plans, such as Ryuji meeting with the track team and An meeting up with Shiho. Kasumi's father arrives to pick her up, but reality itself seems to glitch as he talks. It's then Macca realizes that at no point in his life has he ever seen Kasumi's dad. He feels like he's been spoiled on everything with the third semester, yet this man's face is completely unfamiliar to him. At least there's some surprises in store for the spoiled young lad. The next day, Joker finds the strange man in bed with him and he starts freaking out. The J-pop idol provides no answers and Joker books it downstairs. There he finds Futaba, Sojiro, and Wakaba eating breakfast before learning that the strange man in his bed is actually the human form of Morgana. Akechi walks in and requests to talk in private, being the only other person to remember everything as it was. While he was held for questioning by the police, he was immediately released after the new year because the murder charges disappeared. Kasumi calls in and tells us that the palace we found months ago is now visible in the real world, yet no one else can see it. The trio heads inside the palace to investigate using a brand new meta-nav that they found on their phones, the search history allowing them access, yet censoring the owner's name. First, I gotta get this out of the way, Akechi's kind eyes underneath his black helmet looks incredibly silly. I don't know why, but I can't help but giggle whenever I see it. It looks so wrong. While exploring the palace, we come across a room broadcasting a video of Kasumi's father crying over a dead body. She reveals the corpse to be that of her younger sister, Sumire. She gets a headache before we move on. However, the headaches keep coming back and they keep getting worse. The shadows we come across warn against Kasumi going any further, but we continue on. Eventually, we come upon an interview with a girl that looks like Kasumi, but who calls our Kasumi Sumire. A voice comes on the intercom, encouraging her to leave and return to reality. The voice and palace owner are revealed to be Maruki. Because of our stubbornness, Maruki reveals Kasumi's true identity as Sumire. Jealous of her sister's success, Sumire stormed off one day and inadvertently walked out in front of a truck. Her sister pushed her out of the way, saving her life, but sacrificing her own in the process. Due to the trauma and guilt over what happened, as well as the jealousy, Sumire started to wish she could become Kasumi. Wanting to help her, her counselor, Maruki, used what research he had accomplished on cognitive science to rewrite her cognition, transforming her into her sister. Faced with this revelation, Sumire decides that she wants to stay in this fake reality, though Joker and Akechi are not convinced. Maruki begs they leave and spend a week in this new world, confident that when they return to his palace, they will be convinced that this is how things should be. We're like, nah, Maruki's like, yeah, and Akechi's like, damn, okay. The week following this kinda sucks. Every day you go out to find a member of the Phantom Thieves, watch a scene of their perfect reality, and then Joker gaslights them into realizing Maruki is gaslighting them. Overall, this process takes about 20 minutes in real time, but you're essentially watching the same scene play out 7 times in a row. It's a sequence that I absolutely think is necessary for the narrative, as you need to go get your whole team back, but the execution is pretty boring. It doesn't feel like it really explores the ideas of everyone living in a reality where everything they wish came true, instead allotting 2 minutes for each character to break out of their delusion. The only ones that feel somewhat explored are Futaba's mother being alive and Morgana's human form, yet even then the latter we never see outside of LeBlanc. A lot of this feels like window dressing, like it was tacked on in the latter half of development. Again, it ends as quickly as it began, but that doesn't mean it doesn't feel half-assed. After a week has passed, Joker and Akechi regroup and head into the palace. There, they reject Maruki's offer and are attacked by Sumire, who's desperate to remain in this fake reality. After we beat her, she starts to question herself, leading to Maruki summoning a bunch of tentacles, forcing her back into the delusion, and making her persona go berserk. I'll be honest, I really wish they didn't have Maruki do this, and instead, Sumire's persona went berserk as a result of her desperation fighting against the part of her that knows this is wrong. I feel like it hurts the idea that Maruki is doing all of this because he genuinely thinks it's best for everyone. Maruki is so interesting because the conflict is purely one of opinion and morals, and not necessarily because what he's doing is evil. Ultimately, he's forcing his ideals onto the populace, but it's done in a way that comes off as incredibly generous and noble. He's even fine with letting Joker and Akechi live outside this reality, instead simply hoping they'll come to realize that he's right. What he's doing is wrong, but it's depicted in a kind light. Ryuji saying that he's not a shitty adult at all feels at odds with him doing something so overtly sinister. But hey, maybe that's the point. You already decided you're not going to go with Maruki, so him doing something so evil looking is fully taking the mask off. That he's drunk so much of his own Kool-Aid that he doesn't realize what he's doing is wrong. The big thing here is that he's desperate to keep Sumire under his control because she's his patient zero, the living proof that his research works and that what he's doing is right. Frankly, I love this idea. I just wish it wasn't portrayed as being so sinister. I will say I really like the fight against Sumire and Cendrillon because of how much of a handicap is placed on you. You fight Sumire alone and Cendrillon with Akechi, but both battles really make you feel just how important a full party is. Which is why the rest of the Phantom Thieves, having broken out of their delusion, showing up to help is such a good moment. After the fight, we rescue Sumire and leave the palace, catch everyone up, and make plans to meet with Lavenza at school tomorrow. I bet Akechi is quietly freaking out over Lavenza while trying to play it cool. Bro has no idea what on earth is going on with his little blue girl that phased into existence that no one else is questioning. After school, we head into the palace, only to be stopped at the entrance by Sumire, begging us to let her join. Obviously, we accept, and a little ways in, she gets what's essentially a second persona awakening scene. She accepts that pretending to be Kasumi was not the way to deal with her problems, deciding instead to live her life not as someone else, but as Sumire. Honestly, I like this scene, but I really think her thief outfit should have changed now that she's accepted all of this. Throughout her coming to terms with her trauma, her ponytail has been representative of her sister and the false reality she's been living in. Having that be reflected in her thief design as well as her everyday design would have gone a long way in reflecting her character development. You could say that her retaining the ponytail represents how she's living for both herself and her sister. But the fact remains that this design that's been so heavily associated with Kasumi doesn't reflect Sumire. Hell, even outside of her thief outfit, there are numerous instances where they continue to use the ponytail, and it ends up feeling like a lack of communication between the writers and the rest of the development team. To be clear, I understand that long-haired gymnasts do put their hair up when performing. I just think this clashes all the same. There's also a difference between incorporating aspects of Kasumi into Sumire's design to represent their connection, and continuing to use a design that symbolizes an unhealthy mindset. After a pretty damn lengthy session of running around Maruki's palace, which I'll talk more about later, we eventually reach a dead end and discover that in order to keep going, we need to cut Maruki off from the source of all of his data collection, mementos. I then proceeded to edge everyone and not go to mementos until over 2 weeks later. I really wanted those third tier personas. Eventually Haru was like, "We're going to mementos now," and refused to unlock her persona, so I was forced to go inside. She unlocked Lucy afterwards as a reward for being such a good boy. This new section of mementos ultimately isn't that different from previous sections, but I do appreciate it, as it gives us more time to actually play around with those third tier personas, as well as offering up a pretty drastic visual shakeup. Even conceptually, it literally flips the script by having us go up mementos instead of down. It's a nice little final trip into this place, though coming back to it after a certain recent remake does make it feel a little more barren than my previous visits. Still infinitely better than what was in past versions of P3 and 4. Now, before we get into the palace proper, it's time for the final extra topic, and this time, it's on a mechanic you might have been wondering why I never bothered to talk about until now. Showtime attacks. The reason I never talked about these things is because as cool as they are all literally the same attack. It's style over substance in the sense that everyone has the same outcome. You do a lot of damage. The difference between each Showtime attack is exclusively the animation that plays. While there are ways to trigger them, you still cannot properly plan for these things because they are ultimately random. Not to mention, you can't store it for later use. It's either use it or lose it. If you're in the middle of a multi-turn strategy and one of these things show up, you have to decide to either complete your strategy or lose out on free almighty damage that you're not guaranteed to get again. A character's levels, stats, and buffs do affect how much damage a Showtime attack does, but at no point do they ever feel strategic in any way. It's just an occasional free all-out attack that only targets one enemy and is accompanied by cool animations. It's neat, but it doesn't feel like a real combat mechanic that I need to factor in. It's just press button, do damage, haha, funny cutscene for 100th time. I don't hate Showtime. Hell, I actually like them. I just think they're severely undercooked and incredibly surface level. Persona 3 Reload's 3G system feels like a much more well thought out and purposeful version of this. After we disconnect Maruki from mementos, we head back into his palace and finally have full reign of this place. And my god, this is probably the best palace in the entire game. First off, for the first time in the entirety of Persona 5 Royal, the grappling hook actually feels like a proper traversal mechanic that allows for more complex dungeon layouts and not just a way to hide shortcuts and will seeds behind a single button press. Throughout my experience, this thing was so severely underwhelming that I actually got frustrated upon looking back at how hard it was pushed in the marketing. To me, traversal and movement is one of the most underappreciated aspects of video games. It can have massive, sweeping effects on a game, all because the world you're playing in is deliberately designed with what the player is capable of in mind. The reason why Death Stranding is one of the most engaging games I've ever played is because it is a literal walking simulator, because of how mechanically in-depth the act of walking is and how the world is designed to constantly challenge it. My problem with the grappling hook has always been how it was literally tacked on to already existing dungeons and not used meaningfully. That whenever it showed up, it only ever fell into one of three categories: shortcuts, will seeds, or replacing an action you did in the base game that ultimately results in the same outcome. Maruki's Palace actually feels like it knows how to use this thing to create unique, complex level design that uses the mechanic's full potential. Throughout the palace, we learned about Maruki's backstory in a way that actually feels unobtrusive to gameplay. By paying attention to these segments, you'll be learning information that helps you open locked doors, blocking the way forward. But what makes this work is the fact that you actually have to pick the right answer and can easily get it wrong. One thing with vanilla P5 that always annoyed me is how there will be moments where narratively you're required to learn some information, but in execution, the game actually does everything for you in a cutscene. All you have to do is go from point A to point B. It doesn't require anything of you that would warrant calling it a real puzzle. It only puts up the guise of one. Here, you're required to pay attention to the scenes and actually understand this man and what is happening to him. I will say, some of the dialogue is a little too expositional and clunky, even for Persona 5. Once Rumi has her memories changed, every word out of her mouth sounds so awkward. Speaking of understanding Maruki, I love this medical exam puzzle. Initially, I assumed this would be a case where the game would ask you questions that say more about the developer's morals than yours, but in reality, you're actually psychoanalyzing Maruki, answering not based on what you or the devs think, but what he thinks. You're using everything you know about this man and what he's done to people to figure out the optimal path. You're being forced to understand the palace ruler in a way that feels genuinely meaningful. You're rewarded for learning about him, how he thinks, and why he thinks it. For instance, the second question asks you how you would respond to a lack of results when chasing your dreams. Do you A, keep trying, B, do anything you can to succeed, or C, give up and find a new dream? I knew the answer to this question the second I saw these choices, because during my time trying to get everyone's third-tier persona, Yusuke messaged the chat saying that an art friend of his who was struggling to make a name for himself gave up and became an archer. Maruki had decided it was less hurtful to change goals than to either keep struggling and suffer further, or potentially hurt others by being deceptive. Just a tiny text conversation that in any other month would have been utterly meaningless was actually a hint for one of the coolest puzzles in the game. The last thing I want to praise is the music. It's just so calming and chill while still feeling appropriately intimidating and foreboding. Great stuff. All of the new music in Royal, frankly, is really, really good. The further into the palace we get, it starts to transition from a white, squeaky clean psychiatric clinic to something more holy and golden. People rise to the top, joyous and gay, eventually arriving at the Garden of Eden that is the treasure room. Having secured a route, the gang heads back home, now having come to understand Maruki and his motives. A man full of love that had decided to sacrifice himself in order to allow others to achieve happiness through the use of cognitive science, only for his work to be brought to a halt, stolen, and corrupted by Shido. I'll be honest, this connection to the main plot is a little, I don't know. Wakaba already kind of filled this role, so just tacking this on there just is like, I get the desire to want to connect it, but I feel like they could have probably done better. When the Phantom Thieves defeated Yaldabaoth, they gained control of the metaverse and had their subconscious desire enacted, to see the world Maruki dreamed of come to fruition. During the merging of the metaverse and the real world, Maruki came face to face with Azazoth, the persona he didn't know he had, granting him conscious access to actualization, the ability to alter one's cognition that he unconsciously gained through his studies. With the thieves putting him in control of the Qliphoth world, Maruki is able to rewrite reality itself, granting people's wishes and creating an eternal happiness. The day before Maruki gains permanent control, he visits Joker, giving him one last chance to prevent a conflict between people who otherwise would have been allies. Maruki calls out Akechi for spying on them, revealing that the man listening in is actually nothing more than a creation of his actualization. A cure for Joker's regret over how things ended between them. Undeterred by the realization that defeating Maruki would cause him to disappear, Akechi rejects having his life under the control of another. Maruki takes his calling card and leaves, preparing for the battle to come. Come February 3rd, we enter Maruki's palace and confront him. He dons his equivalent of a Phantom Thief outfit, and the new final battle begins. This fight is broken up into 4 phases, with the first 2 having you go head-to-head with Maruki, Azathoth, and 3 tentacles, each with their own unique affinities and skills. The Tentacle of Protection tanks any and all attacks aimed at Maruki himself. The Tentacle of Healing restores Maruki's health every turn, and the Tentacle of Assistance casts buffs and debuffs. While the tentacles provide support, Azathoth focuses on dealing damage, while the man himself regenerates any tentacles you're able to destroy. This phase of the fight isn't super hard. All you really need to do is focus on attacking either Azathoth or Maruki while taking out the tentacles whenever they pop back up. Seeing as Maruki has both healing and protection, I suggest focusing on Azathoth instead. Once Maruki's or Azathoth's health is low enough, they are fully healed and their HP increases. The tentacles also change up their affinities every turn, forcing you to change things up on the fly. Maruki will also occasionally rewrite reality, so certain types of actions are barred for a turn. Physical skills, guarding, healing, baton passes, magic, or items. Defeating Maruki immediately ends things, while defeating Azathoth puts Maruki at critical health, allowing a single attack to bring an end to the battle. Following his defeat, the treasure manifests and the palace starts to collapse. We book it out of there, only to have the treasure taken back by Maruki, his determination causing Azathoth to evolve, transforming it into his ultimate persona, Adam Kadmon. And it's here where the difficulty in this final confrontation completely vanishes, resulting in a final battle that's just underwhelming. In this phase, you're only able to target Maruki, with you starting off with your HP and SP completely full. The man only has 3 attacks, and while they all do almighty damage, they're never that threatening. Not to mention, he has way less health than before, quickly bringing us to the final phase. Maruki fuses with Adam Kadmon, starting the final phase off by instantly bringing everyone down to 1 HP. While this might sound threatening, not only can you just heal everyone right after, but apparently this move is scripted so that you can never lose. This is his only attack, and it always leaves you at 1 HP. You can target Adam Kadmon's head and both nipples, but unless he's in attack position, you won't be doing any real damage to him. However, even if he is in attack position, it really doesn't matter how much damage you do because after a few turns, the fight just ends. Joker shoots Maruki in the mask, and we chastise him for his actions. Such a lame final boss. The palace begins to collapse again, and everyone jumps into the Morgana mobile, only to realize that they've run out of road. Morgana randomly becomes determined to fly, and he transforms into a helicopter, later revealed to be the result of the shooting star Jose gave us, granting his wish? I guess? Really weak way to justify the existence of this character and object. I'm really not sure what they want to do with this kid. Maruki prevents the helicopter from flying away, and Joker jumps down to free them. The two have one last Metal Gear Solid 4 styled punch-out that I really wish was more satisfying than it was. All the while, the palace and metaverse disappear, freeing reality from Maruki's influence. As Maruki gives up and admits defeat, the floor cracks and he falls. We grab onto him, but his hand continues to slip. The screen fades to white, and his fate is left unknown. Maruki's initial persona, Azathoth, is based on the Lovecraftian god from which everything in the mythos is descended from. While credited as the creator, he is deemed a blind idiot, residing at the center of the universe, surrounded by lesser gods that dance and taunt him, having created everything by accident. Post H.P. Lovecraft's death, it would later be added that reality itself is nothing more than Azathoth's dream, with it all ceasing to exist once the god awakens. Maruki's ultimate persona, Adam Kadmon, is based on the concept of man, pure and untainted. When Yahweh created the first physical human in the form of Adam Harashan, it would soon become corrupted, having eaten the apple of knowledge alongside Eve. Back in the real world, Joker is missing. Turns out everything went back to the way it was in the original game's ending. Joker is being held in juvenile detention, having turned himself in so that he can testify against Shido. The Phantom Thieves all agree to work towards getting Joker released, and everything plays out the way it did in the vanilla ending. It's funny how I lamented the absence of this scene in the last video, seeing how everything gets reset and it happens anyway. Would have been a nice surprise if people didn't go all, actually in the comments of that video and spoiling it still existed. Yeah, I still read the comments. I'm not so big that the value of positive comments is outweighed by the amount of toxicity. I really appreciate that you guys aren't very negative, but maybe chill on the spoilers when I've repeatedly said I'm coming into a game blind. Anyway, the day before Valentine's Day, we're released and we get to spend the next month being a normal high school student, finishing out the school year and then going back home to wherever it is Joker lives. You know, you'd think there'd be something about Joker's parents or life prior to the events of this game. He's gotta have someone back home that gives a shit about how he's doing. Before leaving Tokyo, Joker says his goodbyes. In the original ending, the friends Joker made throughout the year surprise him with a van, deciding to personally take him home. The gang loads up and Joker pokes his head out of the sunroof, ready to spend one last trip with his dear friends until Persona 5 Strikers comes around in the summer. In the new ending, the gang offers to drive him to the station until they spot undercover agents stalking him. Maruki arrives in a cab and gives Joker an escape, with the Phantom Thieves acting as a distraction. Joker and Maruki have one last conversation. The thieves meet back up and give a really half-assed goodbye before driving off, and we run into Sumire one last time and say goodbye. Joker gets on the train with Morgana and heads home. In a post-credit scene, it's implied that Akechi survived the incident in Shido's palace without Maruki's actualization. Joker takes off his fake glasses, and the game ends. So, what do I think of the third semester? Well, let's start with the gameplay. If I didn't make it clear enough already, I love Maruki's Palace. Not only does it have some truly great puzzles, but it finally makes good on the promise of the grappling hook. The story is also pretty damn great, and I completely understand why people think it's the strongest arc in Persona 5. While I will say that the story does feel somewhat disconnected from the base game's theme of societal injustice, I still feel as though it makes sense for this to be a P5 story. Up to this point, the game repeatedly made the statement that people suffering under the control of another is bad. Here, a different yet similar statement is made. Even if one isn't suffering or is even happier while under the control of another, that bliss is not worth the cost of one's freedom. Regardless of his intentions, Maruki is effectively forcing his will on the general population, regardless of what they want. While many people suffer from trauma, guilt, and mental illness, living in a delusion and ignoring that problem is not the answer. In the biggest twist of the century, this story actually salvages Akechi for me, while not betraying who he is as a character. The whiny, batshit edginess is saved exclusively for his showtime with Joker, allowing me to take him so much more seriously while the story is happening. I also love the twist that he's only here because Maruki wanted to specifically grant Joker a wish. Ironically, Joker was basically under Maruki's delusion the entire time. For Sumire, I found her story really interesting, engaging, and that's it. I think she's a neat character with a good story, but beyond that, I really don't care for her personality. I don't think she's a bad character by any means, it's just that she's carried by her role in the plot. I don't have much to say about her beyond what I have to say about the story. She has a hot teacher. Finally, we come to Maruki, and honestly, my biggest takeaway from all of this is that I don't actually hate him. Not like, oh, I dislike this character. I mean hate like how I love to hate Kamoshida. The base concept is the desire to understand what someone is going through and help them being taken too far. At no point did I ever think this man's actions came from a place of malice. Even in moments where I felt like there might be tinges of ego being introduced. That his actions came from a place of wanting to be the one to save people as opposed to actually saving them, I would soon throw that idea out of my mind because it never felt right. This is a man who has been through so many hardships that he's lost his way. But at no point are these actions born out of anything more than pure goodness. I don't want to make him pay or see him suffer. I just want him to stop. I want him to understand that this isn't the way. The reason I take issue with him puppeteering Sumire like that is because of how antithetical the presentation of that moment is to what I understand the character to be. It's too evil, it's too ominous, it's too gross. And that's not the Maruki I know. You can argue it was done this way to be emblematic of his desire being corrupted, but I just think this character is so much more interesting when at every moment he is only ever being portrayed as virtuous and clean. That my decision to go against him isn't based upon him doing something sinister, but because my morals and sense of justice knows that what he's doing isn't right. Maruki is such a complicated character, and while it does get away from the whole corrupt society angle, he acts as a critique of how the Phantom Thieves have operated. It can and has been argued that the Phantom Thieves are effectively brainwashing people, and while there's a whole debate there I'm not willing to get into, it can't be denied that what they do isn't that far off from what Maruki is doing. Honestly, I wish P Studio went harder on this angle, as while this interpretation absolutely feels intended, I don't think they go into it enough. I feel like this is a good segue into the other issues I have with the third semester content. First off, the standard members of the Phantom Thieves feel like they don't really do anything in this story. No one has their wish really explored except Futaba, and even then it's only really on the back end. Everyone's third Persona cutscene is just them apologizing for falling for Maruki's influence, and then they unlock it. They don't feel like they serve any real purpose other than to be the other members of the Phantom Thieves. They're treated like a single character, and it's really disappointing. Even their personalities feel downplayed in favor of everything new, and while I can understand time is tight, it doesn't excuse how the game treats them. I think the new ending is probably the worst offender here. They don't feel like the Phantom Thieves that I know, and it's a major downgrade because of it. They're only there because they have to be, just to leave immediately so you can get Maruki, Sumire, and Akechi. It sucks! It sucks. The new story content just completely lets these characters down. Finally, my biggest issue with the third semester is that it's called a third semester. You see, a standard school year in Japan is divided into 3 semesters. The first semester starts towards the middle of April and ends towards the end of July, with the month of August acting as summer break. The second semester starts in September and ends just before Christmas, with the end of December and beginning of January acting as winter break. Finally, the third semester starts in January and goes until March, with the end of March and the beginning of April acting as spring break. Persona 5 Royal's third semester is a month. It does not take place throughout January, February, and March. It takes place almost exclusively in January, with the final fight against Maruki happening on February 3rd. This isn't me nitpicking, this is me saying that to call this a semester is drastically overselling how big this new story actually is. The reason why this is so frustrating is the fact that in order to get here, you have to have played the entirety of base Persona 5. The reason for this is because a lot of the setup for this story is woven throughout the vanilla story. You're required to max out Maruki and Sumire's confidants, while also getting Akechi's to rank 8 before various deadlines. I do like that by structuring things this way, it allows for you to get straight into the real meat of this story arc without having to spend 2 to 3 hours going through the same rigmarole like with all the other arcs. However, this in no way convinces me that this story had to be told this way. That you had to play the entire 100-hour-long game again in order to get to this point. That Atlus had to create this new content in a way that prevents them from putting an option on the main menu that treats it like a separate campaign. There is absolutely a reality where all of the story and development we got prior to this point was instead told in the new year. Yes, it would mean having to sit through who knows how many more cutscenes and not being allowed to play the game, but if I had to pick between a brand new campaign with a long drawn out intro and having to replay a 100-hour-long game I already played with changes that don't actually change anywhere near as much as the fans, game journalists, or marketing made it out, I would pick the former any day of the week. You know what, if you don't believe me that this was a possibility, let me pitch to you exactly how I think Atlus should have handled this. First off, Persona 5 Royal released on the PlayStation 4. The exact same console as Persona 5! You can still sell Royal as a standalone physical release, but have a special offer on the PlayStation Store where you can get P5R digitally at a reduced price if you already have Persona 5. If possible, make it so you still need to have the P5 disc in the system in order to play it, just in case they're scared someone will just let their friend borrow the original release so they can get Royal for cheap. Multiple PS4 games that have upgraded versions on the PS5 do this. If that wasn't possible on the PS4, then sell it as DLC for base P5, much like how people who had the original release of Devil May Cry 5 could buy Virgil as a DLC character without having to buy the special edition. When it comes to all of the changes and extra bells and whistles that were added to the base game, add a new game option where you can choose between the original 2017 version or the Royal version. Now, when it comes to the third semester content, make it a separate campaign and give it a new name to differentiate it. In this hypothetical, let's call the original story The Rebellion, and the new story The Actualization. If Atlus is so damn adamant about making sure people played the original story before accessing the new content, make it so you need a completed The Rebellion save in order to unlock The Actualization. Make it clear that this is an alternate take on the Rebellion's ending, with the opening scene being the one where Sai comes to ask Joker to turn himself in. Then have the scene play out until Akechi shows up. Come up with a different reason for why Maruki gains control of the metaverse. Have us meet and get to know Kasumi and Maruki once we're in the new year, only to learn how these two factor into the current plot later. Actually spend time trying to snap the other Phantom Thieves out of their delusions, all the while you're investigating what's going on. Use the third semester to tell the full story. I know I'm just some jackass on the internet who doesn't know what it's like to develop a game. I understand that this was Atlus's vision for Royal, and I totally respect that. I just think it's unreasonable to expect returning players to play the entire game again just to get to the new content. For years, I've heard Atlus, game journalists, and the average person claim that Royal is so much more than a typical Atlus enhanced re-release. It's not just P5 with new bells and whistles, it's practically an entire new game. That you're getting an entire third act in this grand epic that will be worth everything it could possibly take to experience, especially if you've already played P5. Yes, there are changes and additions all throughout. Yes, the third semester content is probably the best in the entire game. But now that I've finally crossed that bridge, I don't think this was worth it. Persona 5 Royal is the definitive version of P5. If someone wants to play or replay it, there is no reason to not play this version. It outright replaces the original release in my mind, and it's easily one of the best games Atlus has ever created. But as someone who was only ever really interested in the new story content, I don't think it was worth another 100 hours of my life. And that, my friends, was Persona 5 Royal. I can't believe it, but we're finally over and done with it. A project that took a year and a half of my life that I can finally say is complete. I can now delete Persona 5 Royal off of my desktop, and I never have to play P5 ever again. For as much as I like this game, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified of my future uploads. If you want to support the channel directly, why not check out my Patreon? For as little as $1 a month, you can get early access to my videos a day before everyone else, as well as your name in the end card. If this is the first entry in this series that you've watched, why not go back and give the rest a look? See what I think of the base story of Persona 5 and its various story arcs. For now, I'm gonna go take a nap. We got Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance coming up, and I am so incredibly excited, but I need a break from these massive RPGs. You all have a wonderful day. I'm sleepy. Oh god, Morgana still has control over me!